Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It is good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. President Trump is changing up his cabinet with just over 70 days until Inauguration Day. Mark Esper was fired from his job as Defense Secretary this afternoon. Chris Miller, the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, will now head the Pentagon in an acting capacity. This marks the first official firing of the post-election pre-inauguration time known as the lame duck period. President Trump was last seen Sunday at his Northern Virginia golf club. He was playing the moment CBS News called the race for Joe Biden Saturday. According to our White House team, the president does not plan to concede until he's exhausted all of his legal options. Here is where the race stands as counties in much of the country begin to certify their results. If results hold in the uncalled states, Joe Biden will pick up 306 electoral votes. That's the exact number President Trump secured against Hillary Clinton 4 years ago. In his first weekday as president-elect, Joe Biden met virtually with his newly formed COVID-19 advisory board. As cases in the U.S. continue to skyrocket heading into the winter holiday season, and new cases show up on President Trump's team. Even though he's still 10 weeks away from power, Mr. Biden urged the country to focus on containing the virus.
I won't be president until January 20th. But my message today is to everyone is this: it doesn't matter who you voted for, whether you stood, where you stood before Election Day. It doesn't matter your party, your point of view. We can save tens of thousands of lives if everyone would just wear a mask for the next few months. Not Democrat or Republican lives, American lives. Do it for yourself. Do it for your neighbor. A mask is not a political statement, but it is a good way to start pulling the country together.
Ed O'Keefe, Nikole, Killion, and Anita Kumar join me now. Ed is a CBS News political correspondent in Wilmington, Delaware. Nikole is a CBS News correspondent also in Wilmington with the president-elect. And Anita is a White House correspondent and associate editor for Politico. Welcome to you, all three of you, all stars. Hopefully you were able to get some rest here since I last talked to you. Anita, let's start with this change in President Trump's cabinet. Why fire Mark Esper with just over 70 days left in the Trump administration? And what's been the response from Capitol Hill?
It's a great question. It's a question people have been asking today. It wasn't really unexpected, though. This is someone who the president has been upset with since the summertime. If you'll recall, Secretary Esper was one of the people who publicly said that, members of the military, federal officials should not be going into these cities to try to quell, these protests. He was opposed to that and publicly said that in June. So, his staff has said that he's actually had a resignation letter ready to go for some months now. So it was really not expected at all, not a surprise at all. The timing, though, is the surprise here. There are people that are saying that, these next 2 months of this Trump administration are going to be sort of like what President Trump would see as a second term. He's going to try to do everything that he wants to do, whether that's firing officials, that's executive orders, any of those things, pardons that he feels that he wants to get done before January. We haven't heard from too many Republicans on this, but we have heard Democrats say they are, again, not surprised, but they are cautioning that he should not be doing this with any other national security officials in the next couple months.
So, Nikole, meantime, President-elect Biden has been rolling out a lot in the way of transition. What are the highlights of what he wants to accomplish in the 70 days before taking office?
Well, I think you saw a lot of that today with the announcement of this new COVID task force, really trying to set the tone for what his priority will be, not only over these next 70 days, but for his administration, which his goal is to try to get this virus under control. And so that's why you saw him name this panel of scientists and medical experts to start working on a plan. We heard the president-elect talk about some of those proposals, whether it's expanded testing and making sure there's adequate PPE. You heard him re-emphasize that message of wearing a mask, also trying to prioritize vaccine distribution. So his hope is that this panel can kind of cull those ideas and have a plan ready to go on day one when he takes office. The other part of it is starting to put together his team and who he wants in his administration. So we expect those deliberations and announcements to come in earnest, beginning with agency review teams. We also expect him to start naming members to his White House staff. And then, of course, some of those bigger announcements, for instance, cabinet officials, those are likely to come a little later on, maybe later this month into December. And then I think bigger picture, obviously, you heard the president-elect today again make that detour and really infuse a lot of language again about unity, trying to bring the country together and really trying to set that tone as he prepares to take office. Certainly, this election has been very divided. He realizes that, and so I think he will continue to sound that message over these next 70 days to at least try to start bringing people together as best he can.
And Nikole, we also know a bit about what Mr. Biden wants to do on day one in office. What more can you tell us exactly about that?
Well, a lot of this is trying to live up to some of the campaign pledges that he made. And so CBS News has learned, for instance, that he is expected to unveil a series of executive orders on day one to reverse some of President Trump's policies. And some of these things include rescinding the travel ban on several Muslim majority countries, also reinstating the DACA program, also rejoining the World Health Organization and the Paris Climate Agreement.
All right, Nikole, Killion, I know you have to get going. Thank you so much for being with us. Ed, let me turn to you. Axios is reporting that President Trump is privately discussing running for president again in 2024. And just last week, former acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney suggested that might happen. So what could that mean for the Republican Party here moving forward?
Yeah, and we should point out that neither the president himself nor CBS News has confirmed that, but it is an intriguing possibility and one that is definitely, at this point, to be considered by Republicans who might themselves want to run for president in 2024. And we know there are several who are thinking about that. It is clear, given the high number of people who voted for the president, regardless of the fact that he lost, that Republicans and Democrats understand alike that he will continue to be a presence, whether physically or otherwise, in not only Republican Party politics, but in American politics, really to whatever extent he wants to be going forward. And yes, the fact that he lost with just one term served does leave open the possibility that he would consider doing it again. Whether the Republican Party will want that, I think, is going to be the process and the topic of conversation and debate over the next 2 to 3 years, once we get to the 2022 midterms. To what extent does he want to play during those? And to what extent does he want to really remain active beyond that? Or would he turn his attention back to his businesses? There's also the possibility that if it isn't him, it's members of his family. His son, Don Jr., has talked about possibly entering politics at the local or federal level. There's some thought that even like his daughter-in-law, Lara, who's married to his son, Eric, would be someone to consider. And of course, Ivanka, his daughter, as well. We'll see. But for now, it's going to require a very careful dance by Republicans. Most immediately, the two Republicans running in those Georgia special Senate elections, David Perdue, the incumbent, and Kelly Loeffler as well. Both of them potentially would have to find a way to acknowledge and hold on to their support for the president, while also realizing that in their state, at least, he didn't win. And you know, they will be running without him at the top of the ticket. So that is certainly something that will be a challenge, not only for Republicans, but inevitably Democrats, should he decide to remain active.
Well, Anita, President Trump's campaign has brought dozens of lawsuits, as you know, before, during, and now after the election. Give us a sense of how they've gone and which cases are still outstanding.
Well, there's several still outstanding, and the Trump campaign has indicated that there would be more coming still. So we're expecting some more. There's really two areas that they're looking at. One, something the president talks about a lot, these late arriving ballots. And of course, as you know, some of these states allow ballots to come in after Election Day, as long as they're postmarked by Election Day, and they can still count. Pennsylvania is the big one on that. And they have tried several avenues to get those ballots thrown out. And so far, they haven't. Now, they've indicated that's not the end. They still plan to look further on that. Then there's another issue, which is these ballots that are sort of have a mistake in them, and people have been asked to correct them and they fix them. So changes that have made on some of these mail-in ballots, again, they haven't had any success there. So they're really at a place where most states now that they've looked into, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, North Carolina, all of those lawsuits that they've had so far have been tossed out, mostly because there hasn't been the evidence. They present this argument and say that they feel that there's something amiss there, but then they don't have the evidence to back it up. Georgia was a specific example. They highlighted 53 ballots that they said came in after the deadline, the Georgia deadline to get ballots in, but they didn't have any proof of that. It was just they presented someone who said they thought that it was that way. So they haven't provided the evidence, and what judges have been doing is they're saying, well, you don't have the evidence, and they've been tossing them out. We do expect more lawsuits to be filed, and we do expect them to be on these two main issues. So far, they haven't gotten anywhere. We'll see what happens in the future. And of course, the other avenue they're taking is recounts. They're looking at a recount in asking for one in Wisconsin, possibly Michigan, and they are awaiting a state recount in Georgia.
Yeah, as you note, though, I mean, it's one thing to make a claim. It's another to successfully argue that claim when one is actually in a court of law. So, Ed, so far, the administrator of the General Services Administration is refusing to sign a letter allowing the president-elect's transition to formally begin its work this week. Now, this is basically what happens when you have a handover of power. You have basically transition resources essentially being given to the incoming president's team. So the question is, how now does the Biden campaign plan to deal with a previous administration that does not seem at all ready to work with them?
Well, a few things. First of all, remember, there's a federal law that required Biden to establish a transition team over the summer, and they did. And it's based in Washington. It's got office space already for it in the Commerce Department building just around the corner from the White House. They've been working primarily remotely, but they have the keys to that space if they need it. They also have been in close touch with the White House and with career officials at each of the major federal agencies over the last several weeks on the belief that they would win and on the belief and understanding that they would eventually be able to literally send in what are called agency review teams to begin sort of looking over the books and figuring out, well, who's still here and what have they been working on and what would we rather work on instead. It's that ability to get into those buildings and start doing that work. And it's about $9 million in funding to help keep the lights on for that office and to help pay for the work done by those people that's being held up by Administrator Emily Murphy of the General Services Administration. It's an obscure agency that essentially acts as the government's landlord. They run all major federal buildings across the country, not just the ones in Washington, but if you got a major federal building in your city, it's probably owned and operated by the GSA, or they're renting the space and making sure that it works. And they oversee logistical matters, really, for the federal government. They're also the lead purchaser of goods and services for the federal government. So that's why they're responsible for this. She has said, or her agency has said, that because it's not yet clearly stated and known that Biden has won the election, she's going to hold off. And depending on how you read the law, because like many laws, it's written vaguely and it's open to legal interpretations, she may have a point. No state has officially certified its results just yet. Several of them, as Anita mentioned, might be holding recounts that could potentially, but very unlikely, change the final results. And so she feels, at least for now, that she should wait. Biden transition team turns around and says, no, news organizations have projected that Biden has won the election. He's going to be president. She should promptly sign off on this and allow us to get underway. We'll see. But if these legal challenges by the president take another 3 to 4 weeks as expected, it could be another 3 to 4 weeks before she signs off on this and allows the Biden transition team to begin doing its work. They are expected to hire hundreds of people to help with this work across the government. Many of them are literally here in Delaware waiting for instructions on how to transition from the campaign to the transition office and eventually to the White House. It's going to be complicated. And it's going to make trying to put together a government in the midst of a terrible economic recession and a miserable pandemic all the more difficult. And this is a lot of what many people who are familiar with transitions and familiar with the crises that the country faces right now feared. That it's one thing for the president to go out and do what he's doing and request recounts. It's another to really literally tie up government and governing that will have to take place after he leaves office on January 20th.
All right, I imagine a lot of people will be paying very close attention to see how that process continues to unfold. Ed O'Keefe and Anita Kumar, thank you both. Really great to see you both.